I never thought love could find me in the rarest moment of my life. But that's exactly what happened one sunny Tuesday morning when I found myself in the most unexpected situation. I was on my bike, speeding through the streets of the city, rushing to deliver a package. The wind whistled past my ears, and my focus was solely on making that delivery on time. I weaved through traffic like a pro, feeling invincible, until my front wheel kissed the back of a sleek, shiny black car. And not just any car. It was one of those newly bought expensive luxury cars. My heart nearly stopped. I stared at the noticeable scratch on the car's bumper, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Oh my God," I muttered. "This car probably costs more than my entire life savings." The car's driver stepped out. A tall, intimidating man in a suit that screamed professional bodyguard. He marched toward me fuming. "Are you blind?" he barked, pointing at the scratch. "Do you have any idea how much this car costs?" "I'm so sorry," I stammered, quickly climbing off my bike. "Sorry won't fix the damage." The driver snapped, crossing his arms. "Do you even have the money to pay for this?" I gulped, imagining myself washing cars for the rest of my life just to afford the repairs. And then the car door opened. I froze. A rich, tall, handsome-looking guy stepped out, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. "What's taking so long?" he asked, his voice smooth and commanding. His eyes darted to me and our gazes locked. "Sir, this careless guy scratched your car," the driver explained angrily. James' gaze shifted to the scratch, then back to me. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed but oddly calm. "Look, I don't have time for this," he said flatly, glancing at his watch. "I've got a meeting in 20 minutes. The driver, however, wasn't ready to let it go. "At least let him take off his helmet so we can see who we're dealing with." I hesitated but slowly removed my helmet, revealing my face. Both James and the driver paused for a second. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but the driver seemed less aggressive after that. "I'm really sorry," I said again, my voice trembling. "I'll be more careful next time." James tilted his head, studying me for a moment. Then, without another word, he turned and got back into the car. "Let's go," he told the driver, who reluctantly followed. I stood there, dumbfounded, as the car drove off. I stepped into the glass doors of the big company called Gale Industries, holding the package in my hand. The air inside was crisp, humming with the sound of busy employees typing away, phones ringing, and heels clicking against polished floors. A smallish, elderly woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor approached me. "You're late," she said, snatching the package from my hands before I could even greet her. "I'm sorry, ma'am," I said, bowing slightly. She gave me a once-over, as if judging my worth in those 2 seconds, and thrust a small envelope into my hand. "Payment's inside. That'll be all. Thank you." I mumbled and turned to leave, but something caught my eye. Through the glass walls of an office to my left, I spotted him. The handsome guy from the accident earlier. He was walking in, flanked by a group of men and women who seemed eager to please him. Someone held open the door for him, another handed him a tablet, and yet another gestured animatedly as they spoke. Who was this guy? Maybe he's some kind of big-shot shareholder. I muttered under my breath, watching as he confidently strode into the office, exuding authority. Or an investor. I shook my head, snapping myself out of it. None of that was my concern. My job was to deliver packages, not daydream about the lives of the wealthy. Still, as I walked out of the building, I couldn't help but wish for a better job. When I got home that evening, I barely had time to rest. I took off my delivery uniform and hurried to my part-time job at Bella's Bistro, a small but cozy restaurant in town. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the usual flurry of energy. The scent of freshly cooked food and sizzling steaks wafted through the air, and the soft murmur of conversations filled the room. "Sam, over here." One of my regular tables called out. "Coming?" I called back, flashing a polite smile. Working here wasn't glamorous, but it had its perks. My looks, apparently, were one of them. Sam, one of the girls at a table, giggled as I brought their food over. "You know, aside from the food, you're the real reason we keep coming back." Her friends giggled, and I forced a chuckle, brushing off the compliment as usual. This happened almost every night. Girls would ask me out, leave their numbers on napkins, or try to strike up a conversation while I worked. I'd politely refuse each time. It wasn't that I wasn't flattered. I just had more important things on my mind. That night, as I finished up and started walking home, my thoughts drifted to my sister. Lily was 17 and she was the reason I worked 2 jobs, running myself ragged from morning to night. Her surgery was scheduled in 2 months and the cost was $10,000. In 2 months I had managed to save $3,000. It was a good start, but nowhere near enough. I'd considered taking out a loan, but the banks were reluctant. The most they were willing to give me was $2,000, and the interest was so high it would bury me in debt for years. So I decided to work harder. Maybe pick up a 3rd job if I had to. Lily deserved this chance and I'd do whatever it took to give it to her. As I walked into my tiny apartment, exhausted but determined, I thought back to the man I'd seen at Gale Industries. His life was so different from mine. No worries about money, no sleepless nights trying to figure out how to make ends meet. But that wasn't my world. My world was here, on the streets, delivering packages, serving customers, and doing everything I could to save my sister. One step at a time. I whispered to myself as I fell into bed and slept off. The week had been uneventful until I got a call one morning for another delivery. The address caught my attention immediately. It was the same company where I'd scratched that shiny car days ago. Great. I muttered under my breath. Let's hope this one goes smoothly. When I arrived, I was directed to deliver the package to an assistant on the executive floor. I stepped out of the elevator, feeling a little out of place among the sharply dressed employees bustling around. The assistant, a professional-looking woman in a crisp blouse, was standing near the reception desk. As I approached her, I noticed someone standing beside her. It was the rich guy I met the other day. He was deep in conversation with the assistant, his voice low and authoritative. He exuded that same aura of confidence and power as before. I froze for a moment, debating whether to interrupt, but the assistant spotted me. "Delivery?" she asked briskly. "Yes, ma'am," I said, handing over the package. As she inspected it, James looked up and his piercing eyes locked onto me. For a moment, I felt like a deer caught in headlights. "I remember you," James said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're the guy who hit my car the other day." My face flushed. "Yes, sir. That was me," I said, scratching the back of my head. "I'm really sorry about that." James studied me for a moment, and I braced myself for another scolding. But instead he surprised me. "You don't work here, do you?" he asked. "No, sir," I replied quickly. "I'm just a delivery guy. This is a different company. It's just a coincidence I delivered something here again." James nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black business card. He handed it to me, much to the surprise of the assistant, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Send me a text at 6, he said, his tone calm but firm. I blinked, completely caught off guard. James didn't say anything else, turning back to the assistant and resuming their conversation as if nothing had happened. I walked out of the office, feeling the weight of curious stares on my back. My face burned with embarrassment. What was that about? I muttered to myself as I exited the building. The rest of the day passed in a blur of deliveries. I couldn't stop thinking about James and why he'd given me his business card. Did he want to offer me a job? Was it some kind of charity? Or maybe he just wanted to scold me for scratching his car in private? I got to my other part-time job that evening. By the time my shift started, I was glancing at the clock every 5 minutes, waiting for it to strike 6. At exactly 6, I pulled out my phone, ready to send James a text. But just as I typed the first word, my boss appeared out of nowhere. "Sam," he said sternly. "You know the rules? No phones. Focus on your work." "Yes, sir," I said, sliding my phone back into my pocket with a sigh. The night was busier than usual, and I found myself running between tables, taking orders, delivering food, and clearing plates. By the time the restaurant finally quieted down, I was too exhausted to think about anything except getting home. It wasn't until I collapsed into bed later that night that I realized I'd forgotten to text James. Oh no. What if he thinks I'm rude or not interested? I sighed, deciding I'd text him first thing in the morning. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. The first thing that came to mind was the business card James had given me. I had missed the chance to text him, and for some reason, it felt like a missed opportunity one couldn't afford. I grabbed my phone and typed out a message apologizing for texting late. I hit send and stared at the screen, half expecting him to ignore me. But to my shock, my phone buzzed almost immediately. It wasn't a text. It was a video call. My eyes widened as I stared at the screen. With shaky hands, I accepted the call. The screen lit up and there he was. James was lounging on an enormous bed, a glass of wine in his hand. He looked effortlessly stunning, his hair tousled and his shirt slightly unbuttoned. "Good morning, Sam," he said. His voice smooth. His eyes seemed to scan me through the screen and I felt like I was being analyzed. "Good morning, sir," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can call me James." "Okay, James," I said awkwardly. He chuckled softly. "I wanted to check on you," he said, taking a sip of his wine. "You seem interesting." "Interesting?" I repeated, confused. "So, tell me, Sam, how old are you? What do you do besides delivering packages?" I hesitated for a second, then answered, "I'm 24 and I also work as a waiter in the evenings. It's not much, but it pays the bills." James nodded, his gaze still fixed on me. Before he could ask another question, Lucy popped into the screen. "Sam, did you get the medicine?" she asked, her voice weak. I turned to her quickly. "Oh, Lucy, I'm sorry. I'll get it after I'm done here, I promise." James's brows furrowed. "Who's that?" I glanced back at the screen, embarrassed. "That's my younger sister, Lucy. Sorry for the interruption." James leaned forward slightly, his expression softening as he looked at her. "Is she okay? She doesn't look well." I hesitated, unsure if I should tell him. But something about the way he asked made me feel like he genuinely cared. "She's sick," I admitted. "She needs surgery, but it's expensive. I'm trying to save up for it." James went quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. I wondered if I'd said too much. "How much is the surgery?" he finally asked. $10,000. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've saved up $3,000 so far, but it's a long way to go." James stared at me, his face unreadable. Then he set down his glass and said, "Send me your bank account details." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "What did you say?" "Your account details," he repeated, his tone firm. "I'm going to pay for the surgery." I froze, unable to process what he just said. "Are you serious?" "Of course I am," he said simply. "Send them now." Still in shock, I quickly typed out my account details and sent them to him. Within 10 minutes, my phone buzzed with a notification. $15,000 credited to your account. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. He sent more than I needed. "James," I said, my voice shaky, "I don't know how to thank you." He waved it off. "Don't mention it. Take care of your sister." Before I could say anything else, he ended the call. I sat there in disbelief, staring at my phone. Then I rushed to Lucy's room. "Lucy," I shouted, my voice filled with excitement. "Your surgery has been paid for." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "A friend paid for it," I said, pulling her into a hug. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. All because of James. Lucy's surgery was a success. Watching her smile again, pain-free, was worth everything I'd been through. I owed it all to James, and our bond grew stronger every day. He finally asked me out to be his boyfriend, and I was very happy about it. Dating James was like living a dream. He had a way of making even the simplest moments feel special, whether it was dinner at a fancy restaurant or just lounging around watching TV. A year later, James decided it was time to introduce me to his family. I was nervous, but James reassured me. "They'll come around," he said with confidence. When we arrived at his family's estate, I was awestruck. The mansion was sprawling, every detail screaming wealth and elegance. James' parents greeted us, but their smiles faded the moment James introduced me. "This is Sam," he said, holding my hand firmly. "He's the one I've been telling you about. We're dating." His mother's expression turned cold, her eyes narrowing as she glanced between us. His father simply sighed, shaking his head. "James," his mother said, her voice sharp. "We've already talked about this. We will not accept this relationship." I felt a cold run down my spine. James noticed and squeezed my hand tighter, his jaw clenched. "But I truly love him," James said confidently. His father looked away, avoiding eye contact, while his mother stood firm. "You're making a mistake," she said icily. The tension was suffocating. I could feel their judgment piercing through me. "Maybe we should go," I whispered to James. Without another word, James nodded and we left. Back in his car, I couldn't hide my doubt. "James, are you sure about this? They're never going to accept me." "They will," he said with determination in his voice. "It'll just take time. Trust me." For months, we continued our relationship, and James did everything he could to reassure me. He'd surprise me with little dates, shower me with affection, and remind me that his love for me was unwavering. But one evening, everything changed. I received a call from James' mother asking to meet. I knew it wasn't going to be pleasant, but I agreed. We met at an upscale cafe, her cold demeanor unchanged. She didn't waste any time getting to the point. "My son is not gay," she said bluntly, her voice dripping with disdain. "And we will never let him settle down with you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. "With all due respect, Mrs. Allen, James is an adult. He can make his own choices." She leaned in closer, her gaze icy. "You think this is only about him?" I clenched my fists under the table, but before I could respond, she slid a check across the table toward me. "This should be enough to make you leave him," she said. I stared at the check. The amount was huge. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. But the thought of taking it made my stomach churn. "No, I can't accept this," I said firmly, pushing the check back. She arched an eyebrow. "Think carefully, Sam. You can walk away with this money, or you can stay and watch as I make your life miserable." I hesitated for a moment, then picked up the check. "Fine," I said, slipping it into my pocket. "But not because I'm taking your deal. I'm showing this to James. He deserves to know what kind of person his mother is." Her face twisted in anger, but I didn't care. I stood up, meeting her glare head-on. I walked out of the cafe, my heart racing. I had no idea how James would react, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let his mother tear us apart. James paced the living room as I sat on the couch, still trying to process the check I had shown him. His mother's lengths to separate us had shocked him deeply, but it also lit a fire in him. He clenched the check in his hand and tossed it onto the table. "I can't believe she would stoop this low," James said, running a hand through his hair. I reached for his hand, trying to calm him. "James, the first don't want to come between you and your family." "No, Sam," he interrupted firmly, sitting beside me. "I won't let her dictate my life. And I have an idea to make sure she doesn't interfere anymore." I tilted my head, curious. "What idea?" James cleared his throat, looking straight into my eyes. "Let's have a child." I froze, blinking at him in confusion. "James, you do realize we're both men, right?" I asked with a nervous chuckle. He laughed softly but leaned closer. "I know, but we can have a child through surrogacy. Think about it. If we have a child, not only will it solidify our relationship, but my mother won't be able to meddle. And if anything happens, our child will be the rightful heir to the family business." His logic made sense, but I was still taken aback. "A child?" I repeated, almost in disbelief. The thought of being a parent had crossed my mind before, but this was sudden. Still, as I thought about it, the idea grew on me. I'd always wanted to be a father someday, or at least a mother figure in this case. "Are you sure about this, James?" He smiled warmly, cupping my face in his hands. "I've never been more sure of anything, Sam. You're the person I want to build a future with. And a family. That settled it for me." "It's fine," I said with a small smile. "Let's do it." The following week, we found ourselves sitting in a sleek, modern fertility hospital, discussing options with a doctor. "We'll connect you with a surrogate who matches your preferences," the doctor explained, flipping through some documents. "You'll both need to undergo some tests, and the entire process will require a significant financial commitment." James nodded without hesitation. "Money isn't an issue. We want the best care possible." The doctor smiled. "That's great to hear. I'll arrange for you to meet the surrogate in a few days. In the meantime, we'll begin preparations. As we walked out of the hospital, James squeezed my hand. "This is really happening," he said, his excitement bubbling over. I couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, it is. And honestly, I'm excited too." Over the next few days, we couldn't stop talking about what life would be like as parents. James joked about teaching our child how to run a business, while I imagined teaching them how to cook or read bedtime stories. When we finally met the surrogate, a beautiful, soft-spoken woman named Kate, we knew she was the right choice. She had a warmth about her that made us feel comfortable, and she assured us she would take the utmost care throughout the journey. As the process began, I realized just how serious James was about building a future with me. We spent the next hour going over the details, getting to know Kate better, and filling out paperwork. The doctor conducted some medical examinations, and by the end of the meeting, everything felt surreal but promising. A month later, the doctor confirmed the news we'd been waiting for. Kate was pregnant. James was over the moon, practically bouncing with excitement as he hugged me tightly. "I'm going to be a dad," he exclaimed. Over the next few weeks, James went all out. He insisted on shopping for baby clothes, even though we didn't know the gender yet. "Neutral colors work," he reasoned, holding up a tiny white onesie. "You're acting like the baby's arriving tomorrow." I teased, but secretly I loved seeing him so happy. When the gender reveal day finally arrived, we gathered in a private event with Kate and a few close friends. As the balloon popped and blue confetti rained down, James nearly jumped out of his seat. "Oh boy," he shouted, pulling me into a tight hug. "We're having a son, Sam." The months flew by, filled with doctor's appointments, nursery shopping, and late-night talks about what kind of parents we wanted to be. Through it all, we kept everything a secret from James's parents. We knew how his mother would react, and we didn't want anything dampening our joy. The day our son was born was a day I'll never forget. As soon as the nurse placed him in James's arms, we both fell silent, overcome with emotion. The baby looked so much like James. "He's so cute," James whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. Kate handed the baby over to us with a smile. "He's yours now," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "Take good care of him." We thanked her profusely, knowing she had given us the greatest gift of all. As Kate left, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I wasn't just Sam anymore, I was a father, and I was determined to be the best one possible. News of the baby eventually reached James's mother. She showed up unannounced at our apartment one afternoon, her face a mixture of forced cheer and disapproval. "So, I hear I'm a grandmother now," she said, glancing at the baby sleeping peacefully in my arms. "Yes, Mom," James replied, his tone measured. "This is your grandson." She looked at the baby, her expression softening for a moment before her eyes darted to me. "He's adorable," she said, but there was a coldness in her voice when she added, "though I still don't understand why you've chosen this arrangement." James stepped in front of me protectively. "Mom, I don't need your approval. Sam is my partner and this is our son." Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she replied, "We'll see about that." Despite her veiled hostility, James and I were determined to give our son the happiest life possible. I embraced my role as the motherly figure, staying home to care for him while James managed his business. Every smile, every tiny giggle from our son reminded us that no matter the challenges, our love had created something truly beautiful. The first month after our son's birth was blissful, but then the unexpected happened. Our baby fell ill. He became weak and cranky, refusing formula and struggling to keep anything down. James and I rushed him to the hospital, where the doctor's diagnosis left us stunned. "Your son needs breast milk," the doctor explained gently. "Formula isn't sufficient right now for his recovery. Ideally, the milk should come from the surrogate mother who carried him. Once he turns 8 months old, you can then decide to give him other baby formula." James and I exchanged a nervous glance. Bringing Kate back into our home wasn't part of the plan, but for our son, we agreed without hesitation. Kate moved in the following week. She was as kind and warm as ever, quickly slipping into her role as a mother figure for our baby. She took care of him, and I couldn't deny how much healthier he looked within just a few days. At first, I appreciated her presence. It gave me a chance to rest, and I trusted her completely. But as the weeks turned into months, I started noticing something that didn't sit well with me. Kate and James were growing closer. It began with small things. I'd catch them laughing together in the kitchen while I was putting the baby to sleep. James would compliment her cooking or thank her for helping with the baby. It was harmless enough, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. Then Kate started bringing the baby to James late at night, claiming he wouldn't stop crying. She'd appear in the doorway wearing sexy nightwears that left little to the imagination. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overreacting, but one night I couldn't keep quiet. "Kate," I said firmly, pulling her aside in the hallway. "I need you to stop coming to James dressed like that. It's inappropriate." She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "I'm just trying to be comfortable, Sam. It's not like James cares what I'm wearing. But I cared. And it has to stop." She walked off without saying anything else. As our son neared 7 months, I felt a flicker of hope. Kate's time with us was coming to an end, and I was eager to have our home back to just the three of us. But then James's mother stepped in and everything fell apart. She should stay, she insisted during a surprise visit. The baby needs his mother's presence, and it's better for the child's upbringing if Kate lives here permanently. I stared at her in disbelief. The arrangement was temporary. Kate agreed to leave once the baby turned 8 months old. James's mother waved me off dismissively. "This isn't about you, Sam. It's about my grandson. You're not a woman, but Kate is the child's mother." Her words cut deep, but I held myself. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of James. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Kate's presence in the house became unbearable, and the closeness between her and James grew more obvious. They'd sit on the couch late at night talking in hushed tones, sometimes laughing like old friends. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The connection between James and me was fading, replaced by a growing tension I couldn't ignore. I didn't want to believe James could betray me, but the doubt was eating me alive. One night as I lay awake in bed, I heard them talking in the living room. Kate's voice was soft, almost seductive, and James's low laughter followed. My heart ached, and for the first time since we started this journey together, I felt like I was losing him. I knew I had to do something before it was too late. That Saturday I thought of visiting my sister Lucy. She had fully recovered from her surgery, and seeing her smile always brightened my day. We laughed, talked, and reminisced about old times. But I couldn't shake the uneasiness that had been plaguing me since Kate moved in. When I returned home that evening, I wasn't prepared for the betrayal waiting behind the door. As I walked into our bedroom, the sight before me felt like a punch to the gut. Kate was on the bed, barely clothed, and James was with her, shirtless and visibly drunk. The room reeked of alcohol, and their state left no room for doubt about what had just happened. I froze, my heart pounding in disbelief. "What's going on here?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice trembling. James looked up, his eyes filled with regret, but he didn't say a word. Kate, on the other hand, sat there shamelessly, a smirk playing on her lips as if she enjoyed the chaos she'd caused. "How could you?" I yelled, my voice breaking as I turned to James. "How could you go this far, James? In our room?" James swayed slightly, leaning against the bedpost. "I was drunk," he muttered weakly, his voice barely audible. His words stung more than I could bear. Kate's nonchalant demeanor pushed me over the edge. "And you?" I shouted, stepping toward her. "You've been scheming this whole time, haven't you?" She shrugged, unfazed. "Maybe if you were enough for him, he wouldn't have slept with me." In a fit of rage, I grabbed James by the arm and yanked him away from her. Then, without thinking, I slapped Kate hard across the face. The sound echoed in the room, and for a moment, everything was silent. Kate shrieked and lunged at me, claws out, but I pushed her away. The room erupted into chaos as we screamed at each other, accusations flying back and forth. In the middle of the commotion, James's mother stormed in. Her eyes darted from me to James to Kate, and without hesitation, she marched up to me and slapped me across the face. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You don't belong in this family. I warned you, Sam." Her words burned, but I refused to show any weakness. I turned to James, who looked like a shell of himself, and shook my head. "I loved you," I said quietly, tears streaming down my face. "But I can't do this anymore." With that, I walked out of the house. I checked into a hotel that night, my heart shattered into pieces. The weight of everything crushed me, and I spent hours crying until I couldn't anymore. When the tears dried up, I turned to alcohol, hoping it would numb the pain. As I stared at the ceiling of the hotel room, I couldn't help but wonder how things had gone so wrong. How had the love James and I shared turned into this nightmare? I thought of my son, the innocent child caught in the middle of this mess. I wanted to see him, to hold him, but I knew that for now, I needed to stay away. James showed up unannounced at my hotel room 2 days later. His face was pale and filled with guilt. His eyes hollow and his hands trembled as he clutched his car keys. "Sam," he began, his voice soft and pleading. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My mother. She planned everything. She manipulated Kate and me. I never meant for any of this to happen." I crossed my arms, refusing to let his words sway me. "And yet, you let it happen," I said, my voice cold. "You let her ruin everything we had planned." James fell silent, unable to meet my gaze. I could see the guilt weighing on him, but it wasn't enough. "Not anymore. Take Kate away from the house within the next 2 days. I said firmly, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Sam, please." He started, but I raised my hand to stop him. "I've said everything I need to say," I replied, turning my back on him. I walked out, leaving James sitting there. Despite everything, I couldn't ignore the ache in my heart for my son. A few days later, I went to the house, determined to see him. As I approached the door, Kate appeared, her arms crossed and her expression smug. "You're not welcome here," she said, blocking my path. "He's my child too, and I won't let you see him." "Mo," I said, my voice trembling with anger. Before things could escalate, James appeared with the baby in his arms. Ignoring Kate's protests, he walked straight to me and handed him over. Holding my son again after everything was overwhelming. He looked up at me with those innocent eyes and I almost broke down. "I'm sorry," James whispered, his voice cracking. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After a few minutes, I handed the baby back. "I can't do this anymore, James," I said quietly. "You'll let me see him when I want, but as for us, it's over. We're going our separate ways." James looked devastated. "Sam, we can fix this," he pleaded. "No, we can't," I said firmly. "Not with your mother pulling the strings. Not with Kate in the house." Kate stood in the background, her arms still crossed, watching everything unfold with a satisfied smirk. A few days later, James's mother called me. Her tone was icy, her words sharp. "You need to forget about the child and move on, Sam," she said. "James and Kate will have full custody. You have no place in this family." I hung up, my heart sinking. But the nightmare wasn't over. She took the matter to court, using her wealth and influence to ensure the verdict went in her favor. The court ruled that I had no legal rights to the child. I was crushed. Betrayed by the very system that should have protected me. I spiraled into despair, feeling like a shell of myself. Everywhere I turned, I saw reminders of the life I had lost. But deep down, I knew I had to move on. I packed up my things, left town, and started over in a new city. It wasn't easy, but I poured myself into rebuilding my life. I found a new job, made new friends, and slowly began to heal. James and our son remained in my heart, but I knew I had to let go for my own sanity. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the only way to find peace. Life went on and so did I. Though the scars of the past would always remain, I learned to live with them, finding strength in the knowledge that I had loved deeply, even if it wasn't enough. 4 years had passed, and life had finally settled into something I could call peaceful. My business was thriving, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over my life. The memories of James and our son still lingered, but I had learned to live without them, cherishing the good old moments and letting the pain fade away. One quiet afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. When I did, I froze. Standing there was James, and in his arms was our son. "My son. Daddy." The little boy shouted, his face lighting up as he reached for me. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I took him in my arms, holding him tightly as tears streamed down my face. I'd imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was happening, I didn't know what to say. He's so adorable. I finally whispered, looking at James. James smiled, though his eyes were heavy with emotion. He's been asking about you. I couldn't keep him away any longer. The boy looked at James, then back at me. Are you my other dad? He asked, his voice so innocent it broke me all over again. James nodded. Yes, he is. I looked at James, still trying to process what was happening. Why are you here, James? I asked, my voice barely audible. He took a deep breath. I came to make things right, he said. Kate's gone. She betrayed us, stole from the company. My mother finally saw the truth, and she's out of our lives for good. I blinked, unsure of how to respond. I've missed you, Sam. James continued, stepping closer. Every single day. I let my mother and Kate destroy what we had, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. I want us to be a family again, for our son and for us. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I looked down at our son, who was watching me with wide, hopeful eyes. James, you hurt me, I said quietly, my voice trembling. You broke my heart. I know, he said, his voice filled with regret. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Please, Sam, give me another chance. I wanted to say yes right then and there, but I couldn't. I need time, I told him, trying to steady my emotions. James nodded, understanding. I'll wait as long as it takes. In the meantime, keep him with you. Bond with him. When you're ready, bring him back to me. I'll take your decision as your answer. The next 3 days were like a dream. My son and I laughed, played, and shared moments I never thought I'd get to experience. Every giggle, every hug, every daddy look pulled me closer to him. On the 3rd day, I knew what I had to do. I dressed him in his best outfit, packed his little bag, and drove to James's house. When James opened the door, his face lit up with hope. I took a deep breath. I can't deny our son the family he deserves, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. And I can't deny that I still love you. But you have to promise me things will be different this time. James's eyes filled with tears. I promise, Sam. Nothing will ever come between us again, no matter what. I stepped inside and James pulled me into a tight embrace. Our son nestled between us, giggled, and for the first time in years I felt whole again. That night, as we sat together as a family, I realized that sometimes love is worth fighting for, even when it hurts. Please like and subscribe for more BL stories. Thanks for watching.